This is punctuation video number 2 about the 4 comma rules. Things to know for this video. First, know the 4 comma rules. Also, know the 2 comma tips that I'll give you. The third thing, when we get to rule number 3, know the 2 different formats in which you can separate a list of 2 items. And fourth, when we get to rule number 4, know the 2 types of unnecessary information that there are, and also know how to double check whether or not you really have unnecessary information in your sentence. Comma rule number 1 is called after an introductory phrase. Question number 1 says, even though I was tired, Jenny convinced me to go to the Strawberry Festival. Many of you may hear the introductory phrase here, even though I was tired. And if you hear that, if you just naturally hear that, then you can go ahead and start thinking, well, I'm going to need a comma after that. And then go check your answers for where the comma is not there and also for where the comma is there. Now, you may not hear that naturally, and that's okay. Then this question will just become about listening to the commas in the sentence and determining whether they're correct or not. In that case, I would read answer choice A. It says, even though I was tired, Jenny convinced me to go to the Strawberry Festival. That does not sound very good at all, and so I would just get rid of that answer choice there. Answer choice B, even though I was tired, Jenny convinced me to go to the Strawberry Festival. That comma after the me, I kind of already have figured out that's really not going to work for me. Now, as I go on, C really looks like the one that I'm looking for. I need the comma after the introductory idea. And D repeats that comma after the me down there. And so I don't like that one at all. I'm going to get rid of that. But I do want to talk about D. I've had a lot of people in the past get down between C and D and kind of wonder whether or not D really does work. And as you read it, it sounds like this. It says, even though I was tired, Jenny convinced me to go to the Strawberry Festival. Many of you will hear that and think, that's no good. But every once in a while, like I said, some people get a little bit confused about that. We all do at some point, kind of get confused about a comma, whether or not we need it. If you get down to 2 answer choices and you're on a guess on whether you need the comma or not, always go with fewer commas. Now, I did not say always go with fewer commas. The key word here is when you're guessing. The reason is because the ACT and the SAT, the writers of these tests, as they write their questions, they'll write their right answers one way, they'll write their wrong answers a certain way. And one way they write their wrong answers is they love to put too many commas. You may have noticed that already by now. So it's kind of playing the odds. We go with fewer commas because that's going to be the right answer more than half the time. It's not always the right answer, but on a guess, it's a very good way to go. It's the high percentage answer. Comma rule number 2. It's called after every item in a list. So when you're looking at a question like this on the test and you look at the answer choices, and by the way, remember that that's always the first step for every single question in a writing and language section or an English section. You should always be looking at your answer choices to see exactly what it is you're being tested on. So when you're looking at the answer choices on a question like this and you see that list of items and you're seeing commas in a lot of different areas, then you hopefully will begin to think about comma rule number 2 very quickly. Another reason why I want to look at my answer choices first is sometimes I can quickly get rid of one based on what I see in the answer choices. And so comma tip number 2 says that a comma after a conjunction is always wrong. And I see that happening in answer choice B. So I can get rid of that right away. Now, in real life, I don't know. There may be a situation where that works. But I do know that on an SAT or an ACT, that, when that happens, is wrong 100% of the time. So we can immediately get rid of B. We don't have to read that or worry about that at all now. So what this question is really about is the Oxford comma. And it is an optional comma, at least in real life, but it is not optional on this test. It is the comma that shows up right before the word and. Now, as you read books or internet articles or something out of the newspaper, sometimes you see the Oxford comma there and sometimes you don't. And so the test is really tricky here, because what they'll do is they'll give you a couple answer choices you can get rid of pretty quickly, like B, and then also A. If you read through A, you'll hear it and kind of understand pretty quickly that's not going to work. But look at C and D. And what's the difference here is the Oxford comma. And that's it. And so a lot of students at this point become confused because they remember sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. So which way am I supposed to go? Now, in the future, we should always get this right 100% of the time, because now we know the SAT and the ACT both say it has to be there. So answer choice C is going to be the way we'll go here. Comma rule number 3. It's called between a list of two items. So here we have a list, but it's just two things in the list. And this question says, the miners lowered the cart into the dark, damp cave. So we have a list of two items, dark and damp. Now, there's two ways that we can separate those two words, dark and damp. Format number 1 will say X and Y. So X being, in this case, dark, and Y being damp. So we could say dark and damp cave. The miners lowered the cart into the dark and damp cave. You could say that, and that could be correct. Format number 2 is X comma Y. And so the other thing we would have is just a comma in between those two words. The miners lowered the cart into the dark, damp cave. And so you would want to go ahead and look into your answer choices for one of those two formats. It's almost always going to be format number 2 because they like testing the comma rule for this. I have seen format number 1 show up on the test before. But another thing to know here and think about is the answer choice C. There is a trick there that a lot of students will pick. It looks good, maybe, it sounds good, the X comma and Y. Most everyone will pick that one. So watch out for that. That one shows up many times on this question. And just remember, you can only have one or the other, the and or the comma, not both. Okay? So A is going to be gone because I've got that comma after the word damp, and I don't like that. And B, this looks good. And I can figure that out pretty quick. B looks pretty good. We've talked about C. That is not going to be right. That's your trick answer. And then D, there's nothing there. That would not sound right, and we would need a comma in between there. So we go with B. That fits format number 2. That's the answer. Comma rule number 4. A note about this rule is that it is the most tested comma rule. All of the other rules will show up on your test one time. This one, though, will show up multiple times. We're talking 3, 4, 5 times. So it's a very big deal. It's called before and after unnecessary information. There are 2 types of unnecessary information to watch out for. there are words that we call asides, words or phrases. And there are words like however, therefore, for example, which can show up in the middle of a sentence, and they give that pause, and you need a comma before and after those words. So these are pretty easy questions if you're looking out for asides, and so you should be able to do well there. Now, there is another group of unnecessary information called descriptions, and this question here demonstrates a description. The question says, Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the 20th century, won a Nobel Prize award. So there is a description of Albert Einstein there, the greatest scientist of the 20th century. So if you're looking, again, on this test for these comma rules, and if you're really looking for the most tested one in unnecessary information, you'll be able to pick up on that pretty quick that that was a description. And that it is going to need commas around it, before and after it. And so you'll scan your answer choices for that. As you look at A, it's just a comma before it. You look at B, you have before and after, and that looks good. With C, it's just a comma after, and D has nothing at all. And so my answer choice will be B. The last thing I need to talk with you about, though, real quick, is that you need to know how to double check whether or not you really had unnecessary information there. Many times that unnecessary information, it'll sound unnecessary, as in that sentence with Albert Einstein there. You can kind of hear it. There are situations where something sounds unnecessary, though, but it was necessary to the sentence. So you always want to double check whether it really was necessary or not. And to do that, read the sentence without the part that you think is unnecessary. And in this case, for this sentence, I would read, Albert Einstein won a Nobel Prize award. Now, if the sentence still makes sense and gets across the main idea, then that information really was unnecessary. And that's what happens here. That was unnecessary information. In another case, if you happen to read a sentence and it's not sounding good at all without that unnecessary information, then that was necessary, and you don't want to put commas around it. And so watch out for that, because that is one of their tricks on this test. That's our video for the 4 comma rules. Thank you very much for watching.